And joining us now is Marcy Wheeler. Marcy is an independent journalist who writes about national security and civil liberties, and she's one of the best. She has been for a long time. She writes for a number of online and print publications, including The Guardian, Salon, and The Progressive, and she also blogs as Empty Wheel. Marcy, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
Empty Wheel, I got to say, I've never said this to you directly, but it sounds like it's a very Zen name.
It's even more Zen given its genesis. My original unique name when I went to graduate school was M.T. Wheel, based off my name. My middle initial is T, so since then, Empty Wheel has been my moniker, and the people that it seems Zen and wasn't intended to be Zen makes it all the more so.
Well, there is a wheel, and yet there is not a wheel. Well, thanks for coming on the show, and as always, you're doing great reporting on this national security stuff. But I really want to talk to you first about the Seymour Hersh story. Because to me, it's been, a couple weeks now since that story broke. And I just wanted to talk to you, to me, a little bit, the reaction to the Hersh story, whether it's perfect, imperfect, whether it got details right or wrong. It just seemed to me like a throwback to the days when you and I first went online and started blogging 10 years ago or so. And it seemed like the role of the media was to suppress facts instead of getting them out. Is that an overly harsh assessment on my part?
No, I think the response has been remarkable because you have people who know details who insist that details that Hersh included were wrong. You have the government engaging in non-denial denials, and I did a post on this, but it was, some of it was remarkable. Mike Morrell, because he's trying to sell a book, is out there saying things like, they didn't get DNA from the children, but that's not what Hersh alleges. He alleges that a doctor treating Osama bin Laden got DNA of Osama bin Laden. So there's a lot of little details like that. And then I did a piece at Salon that just went up today on, they released his Osama bin Laden's bookshelf. They claim it's not in response to Hersh. They claim it's a big tranche. It's actually only 409. There's actually like 100-some documents and a total of 409 titles, including those 100 documents. And it struck me as there's that Borges story or essay about how a librarian organizes knowledge, and that's what they did to his library. They said, here are books in English, here are think tank documents, which are books in English, here are official government documents, many of which are books in English, and they invented all these categories, and then having invented all these categories, they then said, oh, and look, half of the documents, it wasn't half, it was closer to maybe a third, half of the documents are conspiracy documents. And it's like, no.
Right, conspiracy theories, right?
And that, there's a long history of spooks calling things conspiracy theory. Like, one of the things they put Osama bin Laden apparently had the Senate Intelligence Committee's report on MKUltra, which is their drug thought control experiments from the 60s. And they put that in the books category, the English books, where they were saying half of them were conspiracy theories, not in the official government documents, which is what it was. They put the 9/11 report in the official government's document, and it was just an odd choice, but that allowed BuzzFeed, which had got the early release on it, to say, well, look at all the conspiracy theories, and there's the so-called mind control program of MKUltra. I'm like, no, it wasn't a so-called mind control program. It was a mind control program. The CIA actually did that. It was actually released, details of it were actually released to Congress, and the notion that that's a conspiracy theory, that's the predecessor to the torture program.
Right, and in fact, that program was the one that a lot of people remember. They used LSD to experiment on people, including at times their own agents. And the Senate Intelligence Committee got the documents. They also, by the way, did a little shout out, I would argue, to Noam Chomsky, a well-known critic of U.S. foreign and military and intelligence policy, saying that 2 of his books were on the bookshelf. Look, I guess my first reaction was, for one thing, what got lost in all the attacks on Hersh by fellow members of the media was that clearly the entire bin Laden, how they got bin Laden story was in fact a lie, because that's been confirmed by at least one other reporter. So we know, in fact, that it was not legwork. It certainly wasn't torture. But number 2, I guess if we're talking about the bin Laden bookshelf that they're telling us about now, Marcy Wheeler, it seems to me people have forgotten their attempt when bin Laden was first killed to suggest that he was obsessed with pornography. Remember that? They floated that story that they found all sorts of pornography, which didn't really fit either the profile of his, deeply held, whatever you think of him, religious beliefs, or the fact that he was an invalid. But they backed off on that. And doesn't it occur to anybody that they might not be telling the truth?
Right. And so they told the LA Times that they would ultimately release everything that was not classified, but they told the Guardian that they're not going to release the porn. And the Washington Post did a story on that, and they said, well, maybe it's because the Al Qaeda is secretly planting messages inside their porn, and it's like, I mean, which is it? Is it classified or isn't it? Was it real porn, or was it a vehicle to try and communicate with others? Even though that blows the whole theory that he was only communicating via couriers, right? So, I'm with you. I think that they said that there was a trove. Thus far, we've seen, I think, including the bookshelf titles plus the actual documents, we've seen like 200 documents. That's not garbage bags full of zip drives. So,
right.
And that would seem to confirm Hersh's claim that their claims that they got trove of information are overblown, unless it's all porn. That they're not going to, they're not going to release Jason Leopold, who FOIA'd everything, FOIA'd for the porn yesterday. So hopefully I'll get that.
Well, I absolutely, and I'll tell you, if they really are making porn to send coded messages, it's a lot of trouble. It just seems to me that preposterous. But now you summarized Seymour Hersh's story as saying everything you know about Osama bin Laden's killing is wrong. Now, details aside about which agent it might have been or which faction of the Pakistani intelligence service or whatever, and we're talking with Marcy Wheeler, great national security journalist. Is it fair to say by now that we have compelling evidence to suggest that, in fact, everything we were told about Osama bin Laden's killing was in fact wrong, or a lot of it?
A lot of it. And I think to my mind, one of the underlying takeaways is that the U.S. government can't tell us what the relationship with Pakistanis are. They can't. They also can't tell us what the relationship with the Saudis are. And I think those two details of Hersh's story, which is that not all of this was another of the non-denial denials. He didn't say all of the Pakistani military establishment was in on it. He said 2 people were in on it from the start, and then, people were not deployed that night and so on and so forth. And they were bribed, those 2 people. That's not all that surprising, because that kind of stuff goes on all the time in our relationship with Pakistan. We know that Pakistan supports terrorism, but we nevertheless still play with them. We know that the Saudis, at least until 2010, and arguably again in recent years, so basically since 9/11, with maybe the exception of 1 year, has supported terrorism as well. And so underlying it all is the story that 2 of our most critical partners in the war on terror are themselves sponsors of terrorism, or at least facilitators of terrorism. Or
portions of their government are, right? I mean, I think the one thing, people, and by people I mean national security journalists as well as government sources, suggest that it's outrageous to report that factions within the ISI might have been helping terrorism. But that's been the government position for a long time. We've seen reports that Hillary Clinton, on her first visit to Pakistan as Secretary of State, said, "I can't believe you guys don't know where bin Laden is." I mean, it's not it's not a shocking new revelation to suggest that portions of the ISI, not the entire government and the entire agency, but have been cooperating with the Taliban, cooperating with Al Qaeda, right? Isn't that kind of established fact at this point?
Oh yeah, and I mean, thanks for the correction, because same thing is true of the Saudis. You know, it's a enormous royal family, and they're, especially now, all lobbying for succession and for position, and some are demonstrably closer to terrorism than others. But that doesn't mean, you know, but that means that there can be significant Saudi support and funding for terrorism in a way that may well have paid to keep Osama bin Laden out of trouble in Abbottabad, which may have made it more sensitive for the U.S. to make a big stink out of capturing Osama bin Laden there. So, and that's the complexity of the relationship. But the fact that our key relationships are underscored by that, I think, is really important. But the government will never talk to us about that.
And let's talk, Marcy Wheeler, about a slightly different dimension of this story, this killing of Osama bin Laden story. Zero Dark 30. Now, for the years since that film came out, the debate has been, well, the public debate anyway, has been, well, Catherine Bigelow didn't get, and her screenwriter didn't get the story exactly right. They were too close to the CIA because really, well, we don't think torture provided actionable information. Good, hardworking, traditional intelligence work, good legwork on the part of the intelligence services is what got bin Laden. Now we learn, with I would argue, a fair degree of certainty, correct me if I'm wrong, that neither of those things got bin Laden, that it was, in fact, according to multiple journalists now investigating this story, it was a walk-in from a senior Pakistani intelligence official that got bin Laden. So we've been lied to all along. Fair statement?
Well, I would say with a high degree of confidence, torture didn't get him. I would say Nada Bakos, who interrogated Hassan Gul, who is the one CIA detainee who provided information on al-Kuwaiti, the courier, before he was tortured over a cup of tea. I think she's pretty credible, and she clearly believes that finding couriers was a part of it. There's some subtlety to the walk-in story, which is that he revealed the Pakistanis had him, but that it took some other intelligence to locate him. And The Intercept did a piece the other day talking about what they found in the Snowden trove, which presumably the NSA believed would never be made public. And that indicates that there was some significant SIG-IN tracking of Osama bin Laden. So there were other parts of it. But part of the story has always been that we got a tip from another agency. And at this point, Germany tried to claim credit, and Pakistan is an obvious entity. And I think a lot of the stories the government tells, though, and I'm thinking, for example, of Najib Ali-Zazi, who's like the one big attack that the FBI has actually thwarted in the process. That came from the net, from Scotland Yard, not from any of the big dragnets. And we used the dragnet to use the tip, but it really came from police work in the UK. And I think we tend to oversell how significantly all of the counterterrorism stuff that you and I are paying for is in these things. They do play a part, but I think that we oversell how big of a part they play. And that's sort of, that's, again, what's going on with the non-denial denials. I think it is true that CIA was tracking couriers, at least in 2004. I think that they dropped it and then presumably resumed it again, but which is another story. I believe that they dropped it. They had very good intelligence from Hassan Gul that they didn't get using torture. They released Hassan Gul back to the Pakistanis, interestingly enough, and then he ultimately was freed in curious circumstances, which may involve him being a double agent. But But yeah, I mean, the story is a lot murkier than people want to make out, and at the core is that the war on terror is the government gets to tell a lot of stories about the war on terror, and those stories don't serve our best interests, and they don't necessarily serve fighting terrorism that well. I mean, for example, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, well, and I think that I think it's incumbent on everybody. You think journalists, but journalists, once again, I think, been trying to suppress debate rather than promote it. It strikes me that it's incumbent on everyone involved to encourage skepticism. We're talking about intelligence agencies. We're talking about deception is part of their job description, and sometimes it may even be wise. But we're talking about journalism as an institution that exists to uncover the truth, not to accept everything it's told. There are now significant holes in the narrative as it was presented to us. And I guess last topic on bin Laden, the Hersh assertion, as I understand it, is that he was an invalid, essentially, and a prisoner, and no longer in the field of play. Do we have reason to believe that's true as bin Laden? Do we have reason to believe that's true?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think even what they've released, it shows that he was trying to micromanage events, but it also seemed like he was like grandpa trying to stay involved, trying to be a player still, right? And I don't think that I don't think the record really shows that he was actively involved. But then Al Qaeda wasn't all that active,
right?
So
and it had fractured into franchises, or as I understand it. So I guess we'll have to conclude by saying that if bin Laden, if the cover story isn't what we thought it was, or the real story isn't what we thought it was entirely, and if bin Laden was out of the picture as a leader of Al Qaeda, they had no reason to send him coded messages in porn.
Well, they might have,
I'm kind of kidding, actually.
Oh, the porn. Yeah. Well, let's see the porn.
Right.
I think their efforts to keep the porn will be very interesting, because a lot of the FOIA. I mean, there was a FOIA some years ago for Judicial Watch FOIA'd for pictures. They're one of the people who first FOIA'd for any pictures of him, and in response to their FOIA, which was one of the earliest, JSOC moved what clearly were pictures to CIA because they're easier to hide at CIA. And I think what's interesting about that is I suspect that they were taken by participants in the raid. And
right.
Therefore, I suspect they were closer to being trophy pictures than anything remotely operational.
Right, and there's been some, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. There has been some suggestion that, of excessive violence and that they demonstrate he wasn't fighting back or whatever. But unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, I guess. Any last sentence to wrap it up?
No, just you should always be skeptical.
Yeah, well, I'm with you on that. And that's why we're grateful to have your reporting, and we're glad you came on the show. Marcy Wheeler, thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
You bet. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and we will be back. This is The Zero Hour.